And we're live.
All right. Hi, everybody. It's nice to see you tonight. Thank you very much for joining us. You're in Kansas City virtually. So this is AngularKC. We're a small Angular meetup in Kansas City. I'm so sorry. I had YouTube up and it started playing and then I got confused. So we're a small community in Kansas City. We try to raise enthusiasm about Angular in Kansas City. We'd love to have you join us at our meetups in person whenever we have them. Right now we are virtual. Thank you very much to this dot and our great speakers tonight. We're quite excited to have them. This is a AngularKC space, so by joining us tonight, you have agreed to the code of conduct. So we will be moderating and make sure you treat everybody with respect and kindness, which is our main goals. So that's all I have, Tracy.
Cool, and I'll just say a little something about Angular World Tour. We're excited to actually be going to all the different cities around the world with the Angular team and other amazing Angular speakers. So if you are joining, I see somebody from Costa Rica and Colombia. So if you want us to come to your city, you can actually go to angularworldtour.com and actually request your city. So we'd all love to come. I know Mark is like, can we go here? Can we go here? Can we go there? So we have some really amazing places we're visiting. But the whole goal here is to just kind of bring Angular love to all the different local cities. And I love KC, so I'm super excited, Elisa, that you invited us to come speak at AngularKC.
All right, we have a great lineup of speakers tonight. We're so excited. First, we have Deborah Kurata, who is going to speak about Angular and, who is an Angular and C# developer and a Pluralsight author with courses in Angular, RxJS, NGRX, and C#. And she will speak to us about RxJS terms, tips, and techniques.
All right, thank you. I'm going to start by sharing out my screen. And let's see, I probably want that. Okay, so I can also see the chat, so feel free to post any questions or whatever. We're going to talk about RxJS terms, tips, and techniques. All righty. So as we just said, I'm a software developer and a Pluralsight author, and here is me in one of my most favorite places on the planet. And we're going to start with some terms. I like to just ensure we're all on the same page with regard to what we're talking about. And since we're talking about RxJS, the first term that comes to mind, of course, is observable. So what is an observable, actually? You can think of it as a collection of items over time. So it's a collection, kind of like an array is a collection, but it's over time. So unlike an array, it doesn't actually retain those items. Emitted items can be instead observed over time. So as an example, to kind of picture what I'm talking about, you can think of letters in an array, and I could ask you for the third one, or sort them, or reverse them, or do all sorts of operations against those values. But an observable is more like this. It just happens over time. So once it's gone by, if I said, oh, now can you give me the third one? The observable is like, I don't know. I don't know what your third one was. It just came and went. So it's important to kind of keep that in mind as you're working with observables. I kind of like to think of an observable's emissions like a box office window. The person at the window emits tickets over time. So if I go up to the window and say, hey, I want to see the Lord of the Rings movie, they can give me a ticket for that. And if I then lose my ticket and come back and say, hey, can you give me that ticket again? They're like, I don't know you. I don't know what the ticket was. They have no knowledge of what they've given. They just emit tickets. Okay, so why would you want to use an observable? If it can't remember what it's giving you, why bother using it? It's really great for things that arrive over time. And guess what? As web developers, there are a lot of things that arrive over time. Simple things like key presses, when you think about it, those actually arrive over time. Mouse movements, button clicks. And of course, one of the ones that's really important for Angular applications is an HTTP response. From the point of view of our Angular client-side application, HTTP is asynchronous. And what I mean by that is our code will issue an HTTP GET request. The code will just continue on. And at some later point in time, that response is returned. And we have to be somehow notified of that change. So observables are also good for those kinds of notifications, a process complete, a failure, or so on. So observables are great to react to an arrival or an emission of a value over time and providing any kinds of notifications. All right, so what does an observable do? So if anyone wants to put a quite quick answer into the chat, what does an observable do? And I'll give you a hint. This is a one of those kind of trick questions. So anyone know the answer to this? What does an observable do? There's a one-word answer. Anybody want to try it? It does nothing. An observable does nothing until a consumer subscribes. When subscribed, the observable begins emitting notifications to the consumer. What kinds of notifications? Well, there's only 3 of them. They would emit a next notification when the next item is emitted into that observable, an error notification if an error occurred, and at that point your observable is basically dead and no more items can be emitted, and complete, where just no more items are emitted. So those are the only 3 notifications that an observable will have. Angular itself creates observables. You've probably worked with these before. So routing emits parameters via a param map observable. We can subscribe to that and work with it. Form control emits a value via a value changes observable. And as we've already talked about, HTTP client emits the response via an observable. So we get notification that, hey, our response finally has come back from our HTTP request. So this is the code that our HTTP client code might look like. You've probably written code like this a zillion times. So we have some kind of method, get products. It returns an observable of product array in this example. The generic parameter here is specifying what that observable will emit. So this observable is going to emit an array of products as one emission. We're specifying inside this function that we want to return the HTTP GET. The generic parameter in this case is telling the Angular's HTTP how to format, how to transform or map the response object. So when an HTTP response comes back, it comes back as just a response object, not of a particular type that we might want. By specifying the generic type in our get method, by specifying the generic parameter in our get, we tell Angular how that should be automatically mapped. So in this case, it's going to map it to an array, and each item in the array is going to be mapped as closely as it can to the product interface. Okay. In our component then, we would have somewhere like in our ng ani-init, our call to this service get products. Okay, so we're going to try another question, and we're going to see if we can get some participation going on here. So what does this code do? Anybody want to take a shot at what this code does? And just as a hint, it's related to the answer to the prior question I asked. So the answer to my question, this code does nothing. Why does this code do nothing? because there we go, we've got some nothings in here. Thank you so much. So it does nothing because we have not subscribed. So a tip here, an observable does nothing until a consumer subscribes. That takes us to our next term. So far we've been talking about observable. Now let's talk about subscription. So subscription, you can think of that like the ever-increasing number of streaming services. If you haven't streamed to the correct streaming service, you're not going to watch that upcoming new Lord of the Rings series on television. So that's kind of how the subscription works. Until you subscribe, you're not going to get anything out of your observable. Technically speaking, a subscription is an object that represents the execution of an observable. So here we do a subscribe. We can then put that subscription into a variable. Now, why would we want to do that? Why do we want to put the subscription into a variable? So we can use it to unsubscribe. So we want to ensure each observable is subscribed, so we get the data, and we want to ensure each subscription is unsubscribed. And I can't tell you early on how many times, even though I knew this, that I asked a friend, hey, I can't get this to work. And it turned out that I'd forgotten my subscribe. So it's something to make sure that you keep in mind. All right, so a more complete component here. Now we're implementing both on-init and on-destroy. In our on-init, we're subscribing to our products. We're putting it in a variable, and then in our variable, we can unsubscribe. Okay, so there's a problem, though, with this code. How do we work with the emitted value? Okay, so we've got our subscription, we've got our subscribe, this is going to emit data. Where are our products? Where is that array of products? How do we work with that? And that brings us to our next and last term that we're going to talk about, and that is the observer, the all-watching eye that is watching for notifications from our component. Oh, yes, I'm a fan. That's our observer. Now, technically speaking, what kind of notifications is that all-seeing eye looking for? Well, it's the same ones we just talked about. It's looking for next, error, and complete. It's looking for those notifications that the observable is going to provide. Okay. Now, this is uncommon. You're not going to normally see code like this, but when I was first trying to really understand how observables worked, it helped me to think about an observer using an explicit observer. And I apologize for my phone. I forgot to turn that off. Okay, so explicit observer. So an observer technically is just an object with three methods, up to three methods. Next, error, and complete. So the next emits, I always point at my screen, like you can see me pointing at my screen. So the next will take that next notification. Along with the next notification, you get the item that's emitted. In our case here, it's an apple, and we can perform some operation. Here, we're just simply logging it. Error, the error will emit what that error is. And then in our arrow function, we can define what we want to do when we get that an error. And complete has no emission, but we can still write code. Now, frequently, especially when working with HTTP, we tend not to use complete, just next and error. So what do we then do with this observer? Well, we put it, pass it in as an argument into our subscribe. So here is our subscription. We're setting it equal to our observable.subscribe and passing in that observer. That way it knows what to do when each of these notifications occur. So now the question comes up often is, what does that $ mean on source dollar? What does it do? Well, it simply signifies that this is an observable. It's not anything that actually does anything. This would work just as well without it. It's a convention that people use so that you can look at a variable and easily see an array or other data structure versus your observable. Okay, so I said that that wasn't really how you normally really did it in real life. So what does the subscribe syntax look like in real life? We instead pass the callback function directly to the subscribe. Starting a little ways ago, the subscribe method was modified in RxJS such that it can only take one argument. In RxJS 7, which just recently came out, that now is not just deprecated, but gone. So those overloads that allowed multiple arguments passed to the subscribe are gone. So how do you pass more than just the next? Well, you then pass an object. So you pass your observer object, but instead of explicitly creating it separately and passing it in, we just pass it in directly. And again, we don't necessarily use complete, especially when working with data, but we do often use next and error. All right, so to summarize our discussion here, we have a observable, which is our source dollar. We call subscribe, which results in a subscription. We use that subscription to unsubscribe, and we pass in our observer, either a single arrow function or an object if we need more than one arrow function, because we can only pass one argument to subscribe. So are we doing well, okay so far? All righty, so techniques. Yes, I was under the same rock next to the same tree as Bilbo here, but I didn't make mine a movie. But anyway, so techniques. What's the first technique we're going to cover? We're going to cover pipes. Not that kind of pipe, but this kind of pipe, where we're going to pass these observable emitted items through a set of operations. So here's an example. We have a letter B, and this is a capital B. We have this fictitious lowercase operator that's going to convert it to a lowercase b. Then we have a fictitious enlarge operator, which will enlarge that lowercase b. So whatever comes out of the pipeline is the input into the next operation. So I said that those were fictitious operators. Some common real RxJS operators are tap, taps into the stream without changing it. Map is a basic transformation. Catch error, catches errors. And there are 100 more that we're not going to all cover here in this talk this afternoon, morning, evening, or whatever. And there is no need to actually go spend time trying to learn all of these. You can find them as you need them. Most people end up using about a dozen or so on a regular basis. Okay, so to summarize our little pipe section, how to use a pipe. First of all, we have our source dollar, and we're going to start receiving notifications by subscribing. We're going to pipe them through a set of operations. Now our tap is getting the apple emitted from source dollar. Tap does not ever modify the emitted item. It's great if you want to do some kind of logging or debugging. It also is great if you need to do some kind of side effect, but it will not modify the emitted value. So into this map is that same apple, just like it came into tap. Map, however, does actually modify the value. Here we're going to add it to a juicer. So what comes out of the map is apple juice. We can then use a tap to look at that. I highly recommend that as you're first starting to work with pipelines and different operators, that sticking taps in between is a really good way to see what's happening within your pipeline. The other nice thing about them is you can just hover over in your IDE, and we'll talk about the benefits of the IDE in just a minute, but you can just hover over that and see what its type is, and then you know what's coming out of the map, and you can know without even running whether you're actually emitting out of the map what you're expecting to be getting. Okay, note that we do not have an observer here. If we don't have any code that needs to be run on the observation, because we're handling it with these operators, we don't necessarily need an observer. And then, of course, we unsubscribe to stop receiving our notifications. All right, so our last topic for this evening is patterns. Look at those lovely patterns on that nice ring. All right, so we're going to talk about two primary patterns. Well, we're going to talk about sort of three of them. First, a classic one, and then two new patterns. So first, the classic pattern for retrieving data. This is the service part, and we've kind of talked about these kind of codes before. This kind of code before, where we're just have a method that returns our observable that emits an array of products. This time, though, we have our tap and our catch error. Our classic pattern for retrieving data in the component, again, we looked at this earlier on init, on destroy, but this time now in our subscribe, we have an observer that's going to take that emitted list of products and it's going to assign it to our local products variable that we probably have bound to something in our template. So it'll make that data appear as soon as the data is returned from the server. So that's the classic pattern. That's probably what you've seen in all the documentation, and it might be what you're currently doing now. But notice that this service code is procedural, meaning it's a subroutine or a function or a method, whatever you want to call it, that you're calling in order to get this observable back. What if we simply declared a variable instead? So here's our declarative products dollar variable. Now it has basically the same code, but now it's a property of our service. That means that we have this kind of live stream that we can work with. So we can merge it with other streams. We can pipe it through some more operators. There are so many more things that we can do with this now that we've used it, defined it declaratively instead. Okay, how about the component? Well, this is calling our method procedurally. How do we deal with it if we're going to go declarative? The code would just simply be this. So in our component, we're defining another variable local to our component and setting it equal to this .product service .products dollar. So we're setting it equal to the property in our service that's going to provide this observable. Well, you might look at this code a minute and say, Deborah, wait a minute. What about the subscribe and unsubscribe? How are we dealing with that? Because as we said, our observable won't do anything unless we subscribe. And to prevent any kinds of issues with memory or whatever, we want to ensure we unsubscribe. So how would this possibly work? Well, that brings us to the next tip, which is to use the async pipe. In our template, we have our pipe here, and the async pipe is different from the RxJS pipe and the pipeable operators. This is the same kind of pipe like the date pipe and the number pipe and all of those kinds of things. This then will automatically subscribe and unsubscribe for us so that we don't have to do that. Once it subscribes, any item emitted from that stream will be emitted into this variable defined with our as clause. So when our observable emits a value, it will emit it into products, which we can then use inside this element in our template. Okay, so I call this a declarative data access pattern. So starting in the service, we just use a variable property to hold on to our observable. Then in our component, we have a property that we're assigning to this service property. We could also do a pipe here if we wanted to catch the error and display an error message if something is wrong with that HTTP request. And then we use the async pipe. Okay, now, when I cover this, one of the most common questions I get is, okay, this declarative stuff is all good and nice, but with a procedural approach, I can pass data in. So say we don't want to get all the products, we only want to get the products for a particular category. We've got hundreds of thousands of products. We only want to display a subset of them for our users. how are we going to pass that in when it's declarative? How are we going to get this category ID? How can we make this work? And the answer is that it is requires a little bit, thinking about this just a little bit differently. So instead of thinking about, oh my gosh, it's declarative, how am I going to pass this in? Think about it instead as the value needs to be emitted over time. So instead of passing in our category, think about having that category ID emitted over time. And as soon as we're talking about emitting over time, we're talking about observables. So how do we deal with that then? Here is an example UI. So here we're going to have some kind of action that's going to be emitted over time. Now, in this case, it's a user action, but it doesn't have to be a user action. It could be a routing action or something coming in from another system. It could be any number of different kinds of actions. But in this case, every time the user clicks on a category, we want to emit an item over time. And then we want our products dollar to react to that, to respond to that. So that is prime for an observable. Now, so far, Angular, of all the everything we've talked about so far, Angular is creating these observables for us, emitting the values for us, and all we're doing is watching for the emissions. If we want to create our own observables, what we'd use is a subject or behavior subject. The pattern for our subject or behavior subject is normally defined like this. We use a private variable for our subject. We declare this in a service, and our service will manage that subject. That helps encapsulate it a little bit and helps prevent other components from randomly emitting something in there or accidentally completing it or airing it out or something, so that we can, in our service, in this service, control that subject. The generic parameter that we define here is the type of item that will be emitted. So in this case, our category ID is a number. Then we want other parts of the code to be able to subscribe to the observable and get the emissions. So we declare a second variable that holds the publicly accessible part of our observable, which is going to be emitting then the values. So anything can subscribe or use this observable to be notified when the category subject is changing. Okay. Now, the difference between a subject and a behavior subject is when any of our code, one of our components, subscribes to the subject, it won't get an emission until the subject emits the next time. With a behavior subject, whenever any component subscribes, it will immediately get an emission. And that emission will either be the last emission, whatever was it emitted the last time, or if nothing's been emitted yet, it will emit a default value, which we have to specify here in the constructor. Because in our example, we don't want a predefined selected category, we want the user to control that, we're going to use a subject. So because we've made our subject private here, in our service, we are also going to have some method that is going to call that subject's next method. Unsurprisingly, the subject has three methods. Anyone want to guess what they are? Next, error, complete. And we can then next, error, or complete our subject. So here we're using next to emit the category ID into the stream. So if we have multiple components listening for the category to be changed, they can subscribe to this observable and they will get notified when that occurs. Okay, so here's our last pattern. It's the retrieve on action pattern. So here is our subject, and then here is our products dollar. So we're taking our category selected action stream, which will emit each time that the user modifies that category, and we're going to pipe it through some operations. So the question is, what kind of map do we want here? We need to somehow transform this category ID into a list of products for that category ID. So this leads into two questions. First of all, what about this inner observable here? When I use the async pipe to subscribe to my products dollar on my component, since that's assigned to the products dollar in the service, it will basically, since it's a reference, it will subscribe to this products dollar. And since that's referencing category selected action, it will automatically subscribe to that. So I don't have to worry about subscriptions. But what it won't do is automatically subscribe to this. So this code won't ever actually issue that HTTP GET request because that has not been subscribed to. The other question is, okay, what kind of map should I be using here? There are several kinds of maps in Angular. What kind should I be using? So let's look at the second thing that I just said there, what kind of map first. To figure out what kind of map, one of the things that you can do is leverage your IDE. So if in your IDE, without even running the application, you go into VS Code and you simply hover over products dollar, if we used a map here and we hovered over it, it's going to tell us that products dollar is defined as an observable of product array. Now, that's not what we want. That means that the template is going to emit an observable of product dollar, and it's not going to know what to do with that. So we somehow need to unwrap that or flatten it. The other thing we still haven't dealt with is how to deal with this inner observable. So we need to flatten and we need to subscribe. So our tip here is to subscribe to an inner observable and flatten the result. Use something called a higher order mapping operator, or it's also sometimes called just a flattening operator. Higher order mapping operators automatically subscribe to that inner observable and they flatten the result. So instead of returning so they will instead return an observable of the type, not an observable of the type, which is of course what we would want. They also automatically unsubscribe from the inner observable. Some common higher order mapping operators are switch map, which stops the current operation and performs the new operation, concat map, which performs each operation one at a time in order, and merge map, which performs each operation concurrently. So the retrieve on action pattern, to summarize, would look like this. So our products dollar, we're going to use switch map. Why switch map? Because the user could say, I want category 5, no 7. And what we don't want to do is get all the products for category 5, wait for them all to come back, and then go get the products for category 7. We want to switch it, canceling that first request and switching to the new one. So switch map is often a good choice when the user could be still picking something else as you're going along. And if we leveraged our IDE again here, now that we're using switch map instead of map, we can see that we're getting an observable of product array and not an observable of product array. Okay, so walking through a brief summary of this last pattern, the user picks an action. So they're picking whatever category that they want. In our template, we've got a select, and every time it's changed, we're going to call a method on our component. That's all basic Angular code. We also somewhere have in this template a display of all of our products using an async pipe. So that's going to be what's going to subscribe and unsubscribe. In our component then, we define our products dollar property, which just calls our product service products dollar. We of course have to inject in that product service, and we have our onSelected method, which is going to call the method in our service that is going to emit the value. So the user picks something, it goes through the components code into the service, which is going to cause it to emit the value. So here in our service, we've got our pattern for our category. We've got our selected category changed method, and we have our products dollar observable using the switch map, which will flatten and subscribe. And then we end up with our data here. $1,900 for a Palantir. That's not too horrible, I guess. All right. So thank you all so much for listening to my portion of tonight's talk. And here are some links. You can reach out to me on Twitter. I have 2 GitHub repos. One's called Angular Action Streams. The other one, what I did is I took the Tour of Heroes sample application that comes with the documentation, and I converted it into using a declarative reactive approach. So if you wanted to see, I have both what I started with, the before and the after, in that GitHub repo. So you can kind of see how they're different and walk through how they compare. All right, that's it.
Thank you, Deborah. That was a great talk. I learned a lot. Let's see. Yes, exactly. Yep. Hand clapping. I think we have one question. I don't know if I can click this one. That is, what is the benefits of using this reactive approach?
One of the key benefits is that these streams then are live. So instead of having to keep calling a subroutine to get the observable, you can actually work with them. You can pipe them through, you can merge them together. Frequently, when you build a UI, your UI isn't getting data from one source. It might have to get data from 3 sources. You can take your live observables and combine them with the combination operators available in RxJS so that you can get your data exactly how you want it in your service and provide it to your UI. So I think it really can simplify the code and simplify how you organize and manage the data for your application.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We appreciate you joining us tonight.
Thanks.
All right, we have our next speaker. We have Mark Thompson, who is a developer relations engineer at Google and Angular core team, and he is going to speak about the state of Angular.
I am, but now it is time to get this party all the way started. So here's what I need right now in the chat. I need everybody in the chat. When you see my screen, I need you to put the thumbs up emoji right in that chat, because I'm not going to start until I start seeing that thumbs up emoji. I need that energy. And if you're feeling really spicy, definitely put that hand clap emoji, because Deborah just laid down some amazing knowledge. That was fantastic. I actually learned even more about RxJS by watching her content. So that was phenomenal. So let's see. Let's see. But okay, I see Lars in the building. See, Lars is already knowing the energy to bring. Lars brought out the rock out. I see that energy. All right, let's get started. So I have a few minutes, and I want to spend some time with you folks, and I want our time together to be special. So first and foremost, thank you for coming to hang out. Thank you for spending time with us today. This is a very, very special time. I am so grateful to be a part of the Angular World Tour. So let's get started. Yeah, so my name is Mark. I work at Google on the Angular team, and my pronouns are he, him. And you can find me on Twitter at Mark Texan. I am the self-proclaimed community-elected mayor of wholesome and positive content. So if you like that type of stuff, definitely come for that. If you came for the tech tweets, don't come for that, because I rarely ever tweet tech tweets. All right. So let's get this thing started. All right, clicker. There we go. Bye-bye. All right, so I want to talk about the Angular's core team values to kind of set the stage for today, to talk about what we're going to talk about. This fan is blowing in my face. Okay, there we go. Not as much better. So on the Angular team, here's what we're thinking about. We want to help developers have a platform that they can have this experience where they build things that they love to build, because we have tooling that enables you all and really supports you. Then we want to make sure that with those great tools that you can build apps that your users love to use. And then at the end of all of this, even I would say for me, higher than everything, is that we have to make sure that at all costs, we preserve a community where everyone feels welcomed. This place is worth nothing if people don't feel welcome. And you all know this. You know that a framework only goes as far, or a product only goes as far as the community around it is willing to take it. And let's talk about the Angular community, because here's what's really interesting for me. When I joined Google and joined the Angular team, I felt this incredible energy of people inside of Google wanting me to succeed, but the community outside of Google wanting me to succeed. You all embraced me with open arms, and I felt right at home. And it had me thinking about, well, what does that look like for other people? For people who are maybe joining the community as a new developer, for people who are joining the community as a senior developer, and they're learning about Angular. What does that experience look like? And I can tell you from what I've seen, it is absolutely phenomenal. You folks are incredible. Let me tell you of just a few stories about what I've learned from the Angular community. So I would definitely give a shout out to Eric Slack and the Angular meetup. Let me tell you why. Because Eric is super intentional about creating a space where you can get diverse and fresh talent up there on stage. And it's a really well-known fact that if you feel like you want to speak, but you're not ready, Eric will actually help you figure out what you need to do next, because he's so passionate about Angular and making sure people feel welcomed in the Angular community. Then I think about someone like James Henry, who took his own time, months and months of his own time, to build an Angular ESLint, because the TypeScript linter was being deprecated. TSLint was being deprecated, and we didn't have anything. And he spent time working on that. Because why? And this is all for free. Why? Because he loves the community. Now, I have done hobby projects. And ask me how many have I finished. Probably out of the 10,000 I've started, I probably finished like a handful. But so you know that it takes a lot of love and care to get to the end of a project. So that's really, really special. But then I also think about people like Sander, Elias, and Frosty, who, and the team in general that they're on, that work on Scully, right? Because people wanted to use their Angular skills to build static applications, right? A static site generator based on our existing Angular skills. And these folks and the other contributors came to the rescue and started building that so we could have a solution. I think that's really, really special, and I'm very grateful. And then even in this meetup, all right, I knew Tracy was going to be here, but I was going to say it anyway. Tracy and this .labs, like that team, they're doing the Angular World Tour. They do trainings, they do meetups, they provide content and blogs. I mean, they do so much for this community, and so much of it is just available to you as community members. You got to love a community that supports each other like that. Now, I've listed just four examples, right? But you know that I could go on. I could talk about people like Deborah, who have put so many hours into making RxJS, accessible, and help you build those mental models. I could talk about the incredible GDE community who was out there being leaders in different regions. I could talk about so many people, and there's just so many of you that I could call out. And I just want to say thank you for that part of the community, because you all are what make Angular special. We can build so much, right? But it wouldn't matter if you all weren't a part of this. So I have to give just a lot of love and appreciation to you folks. You know what? I have so much appreciation. Here's what I want you to do. Wherever you are, if you can get your left hand up, it's kind of like how I have mine. You see that hand right there? That's a high five from me to you, because you are phenomenal. So now that we talked about the community, let's talk about just Angular in general. Let's get people said, hey, man, this is a state of Angular. So what is the state of Angular? Well, let's talk a little bit about that. What about Angular at Google? So what does it look like behind the walls of Google? Well, let's talk about that. So there are thousands of people inside of Google writing Angular code monthly. All right. And the demand for Angular developers internally is great because we train about 1,000 engineers a year with our internal training for Angular, about 1,000 people. So Angular is doing great. There are more than 2,600 projects that are using Angular. Some of your favorite tools, if you've ever used Firebase, that tool is built with Angular, the Firebase console specifically, built with Angular. So production tools inside and outside of Google are using Angular, and Angular is thriving. And it's, again, because of the community inside of Angular and outside of Angular. But let's talk about adoption in the community. Okay, let's talk about some adoption numbers. Well, based on some searches and some content that we gathered from NPM, we're somewhere, so we've seen it go from 1.4 million to 2.6 million weekly downloads. Now, this data, though, is missing the behind the scenes of people who maybe use Angular with a private NPM repo, right? Where it's not public, where they don't pull from the major repo, they have their private one. So we don't have that data, but that's still pretty great. 2.6 million downloads per week is pretty phenomenal. And then when we searched on GitHub, guess what we found? Almost 2 million, 1.8. So almost 2 million GitHub projects that use Angular. And again, even with this data, it doesn't capture any of the repositories that are private. It doesn't capture folks who are using like in-house repositories. It doesn't capture people on GitLab or Bitbucket, etc. So just from GitHub alone, we see almost 2 million GitHub projects using Angular. I don't know about you folks, but this looks like people are having a good time. And we're glad that you are. The community is getting involved with Angular, and that's what also makes you all special, because we build Angular in public right along with you. So we take your contributions and merge them into the framework that is being used and downloaded millions of times. Here are some of the cool contributions that we just saw get included. So you can avoid the NG zone from throwing navigation-related warning messages. You can see now that HTTP client supports specifying request metadata. We got min and max form validators have been added, right? This is from the community, right? People saw the need for these things and they brought them in. And there's support for app initializer to work with observables. Didn't we just learn more about observables? Let's go. So you probably see that list and you might say, well, I want to contribute. I want to be a part of this Angular party. Well, there are multiple ways that you can join the party. Let me tell you what you can do. You can submit pull requests. That's one way. So you saw some folks already submitted pull requests and we merged those in. But if that's not your jam, maybe you can participate in the RFCs, our requests for comments, and you can respond to our surveys. We take that information and we listen to you and try to make the best decision for the most amount of the community as we possibly can. We are not a perfect team. No matter what we do, somebody will feel like, okay, that wasn't the right decision for them, but we really do try to listen to you and make decisions that benefit the most amount of the development community. You can also support via our feature requests, because a lot of times folks in the community will be using Angular. Now, if this has been you, let me see, let's see. Let me get a star in the chat if this is you, where you've been using Angular and you've thought to yourself, wow, I really wish that Angular did this. I really wish Angular did that, right? And you have that moment. Okay, so that is a time where the feature request process comes up and you folks open quite a bit of features. We just recently included a new process to help manage all of these feature requests. Let's take a look at that. So when we get a feature request, here's what happens. Somebody from the team will triage it and then they'll read it and look at it and say, okay, this is a feature request or is this an issue? If it's a feature request, we will label it as a feature request. All right, then if it already aligns with something that we are doing and we can clearly see where it aligns with the roadmap and the current vision for where the platform is going, the current direction, we can label that thing as prioritized and then it gets put into the queue to be worked on. Okay, and then that's the end of that story. But if it is not clearly aligned, we still want to hear you. We still want to hear you, right? So we're going to leave it in this review period that's about 60 days, right? And during that time, what we're hoping for is that you as a community can leave thumbs up. right? And so if you can leave the thumbs up on that issue, what it will help us to do is to know if this is something the community is really rallying behind. And then what ends up happening is we can start to look at it again and say, okay, how can we fit this in? What can we do to prioritize this if it is possible? Okay, now, I know you see that there are some arrows pointing to close here. That's because not every issue is going to be a good fit for us to include as a core part of Angular. But that doesn't mean that's the end of the story for that feature. Sometimes there will be features that are better left for you folks in the community to implement. And we want to leave that opportunity for you because that's a great chance for you to build your Angular skills and to support the community in your way. All right. And when we do go to close the issue, if it cannot be labeled as prioritized, right, we won't just close it and then walk away. We're going to have some transparency and let you know why we closed that issue. So hopefully this will help to give even more insight into what we're doing on the Angular team and give you a better chance to get some of your great ideas included in the platform. All right, I'm going to go quickly through what's new so we can still have, some time together. All right, so we just released version 12. We got nullish coalescing. And so you're going to take a complicated expression like this, and you can turn it into this. Now, what I've seen a couple of comments on this is, well, we had the double pipe OR operator. Well, remember, that's a little different because this is going to check for null and undefined, where the double OR actually checks for falsy or truly. So 0 is a valid value for age, but if you use the double pipes, that actually would make it falsy. So that's actually not what you're looking for. So this nullish coalescing is going to look for undefined and null and help you out there. We got Inline Sass. I know I can see you. Listen, I can see you in your chairs jumping for joy because you can start to think about this idea. Well, I can have my templates inline and I can have my Sass inline with single file components. Okay, with great power comes great responsibility. Here's what we're recommending. If you have small amounts of like styles or Sass for a component, then this makes a lot of sense. But this is not an invitation to make massive components, all right? With 60, 65 lines or 100 lines of Sass code, that should still go into your CSS file. NG build does what? Production by default. I have something for you. Bow. That's for all of you who've been waiting for this. I know you've rolled your eyes many a time wanting to build, and you got the development build and you just rolled your eyes in frustration. Why does Angular do this? Well, we've heard you, friends. And now we have it where ng build by default does production mode. And remember, we don't migrate existing projects with this, but here's a command that you can use to migrate your existing project. So this will help you. You can use the migrate only flag in production by default for an existing project. New projects get this automatically. Strict mode is enabled by default with new projects using version 12. Super great. You're going to catch those pesky bugs earlier because the strict mode has some different things that'll be checked before you go to build. So that's going to help you out. If you want to learn more about this, check out goo.gle/angular-enabling-best-practices. We got a lot of details there that explain to you a lot more of the value that you'll get from strict mode. All right, some more updates. Webpack 5 is production ready. Let's go. Upgrading TypeScript to 4.2. Let's go. And then this is really, really awesome to me. Ivy-based language service is enabled by default. How phenomenal is that? Now, the Ivy-based language service works in your IDE. So what's going to be really valuable for you is that you'll get really cool features like improved code navigation features. You'll be able to get some of your static type checking in your templates. And check this out. This is super fire. It'll give you errors that you get during from the compiler. So you'd actually get the same kind of parity with that. That's going to be super beneficial for you. If you're already using this, continue to enjoy it. But what's really powerful here is the Ivy part, because here's what the team is thinking about. We want to make sure to get Angular to a place we call Ivy everywhere, because Ivy was our big update that gave the power for the things like the language service for faster builds, lots of the great features that you see rolling out in Angular. And to get there, we've had to make some changes to the platform. Okay, So for example, one of the things that we really want to see happen over time is View Engine is deprecated. So View Engine is deprecated now. We're going to remove it in a future version of Angular. And View Engine served us well, but it's time to migrate everyone over to Ivy if you aren't already. Now, if you are a library author, we definitely encourage you to start using the convert your library over to Angular. That's going to be your best bet. We still have NGCC, which allows you to run your View Engine libraries in an Ivy app. But again, that's still a bottleneck that we want to, that's one step we can take out. We could take that NGCC out, and we want to make you all have the benefits from Ivy. If you want to learn more about this and more about how you can get your libraries up to date to use Ivy, check out goo.gle/improving library distribution. Okay, friends, let's talk about quickly the future of Angular. In Q2, here are some things that we've already done based on our roadmap. Angular Dev Tools launched. People are having a good time. We've updated our release process to streamline it, which is really great. We've worked with the Chrome team to internally at Google to work with the trusted types API support to get that in Angular. And we've been working on optimizing build speeds and bundle sizes. These are all things from our roadmap that were launched in Q2. Now, here's what we're moving forward with in future things. So deprecating and removing support for IE11. That's already happened where we start the deprecation process, and it will be removed automatically in the future version. We'll remove support. We're looking at how do we get to leverage ES 2017 and more as a default output language, right? Because there's a lot of expressiveness and a lot of cool code that we could take advantage of. We want to do that. We want to figure out how to make that happen. So we're working on that. We're exploring that. We think we can improve test times and debugging with the way things work right now. We can do better, and we're working on it, and we're looking at the opportunities to do that. And we hear you also about wanting more details about like how change detection and Zone.js work together, etc. Right? We hear you. We're working on advanced guides and content to help with those answers. And I know now some of y'all are probably really bouncing up in your seats right now. Optional NG modules. I do not have a solid date for you, but I will tell you this: we are thinking about it. What does a world with optional NG modules look like? We don't. Again, do not come to the Q&A and ask me about when this is happening. I don't know, but we are exploring it, friends. All right. So with that being said, this was, the state of Angular right now. Again, thank you to the amazing community for being you. We're not here without you. Thank you to AngularKC for being an amazing host. Thank you to This.Labs for having us. And until the next time, my friends, go build great apps. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. That was a lot of fun and a lot of interesting, great things in Angular, and also great news about the community. I mean, that's one of the things I love most about Angular is the community. It's so welcoming. It's so nice to be part of. Yeah, and it's because of great speakers like you and Deborah and Tracy helping put together, bringing the community together. So thank you. So thank you for that. Let's see if we have any questions. Well, you got a question about NG modules. But no, I think that was a joke question.
Well, Steve, I'll tell you this. A lot of people do ask about optional NG modules. So when we get there, I'm gonna find you on Twitter and let you know, like, hey, Steve, this is out. Go ahead and let's get this party started.
All right. Well, if there's not any non-NG module questions or optional NG module questions for Mark, then in that case, we'll move on to our next speaker. It is the amazing Tracy Lee, who worked so hard in organizing the Angular World Tour and bringing us all together tonight. Tracy is on the RxJS core team, an Angular Google developer expert and CEO of This.Labs. And she is going to talk about a quick start guide to contributing to open source, learn best practices, how to get started, and what to know about the culture.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm super excited to give a quick talk today about one of my favorite things, which is contributing to open source and Angular and all the awesomeness. So I get this question a lot. How can I contribute to open source? This is something that people ask me time and time and time again. And, you know, the answer is actually quite easy. So I'm always, you know, telling people, hey, it's really easy. And there's tons of ways to actually do so. So today, again, it's going to be like a quick start guide to contributing to open source. Like Elisa said, I am CEO of This.Labs, ArcGIS core team, Google developer expert, Microsoft MVP, and just like love community generally. So I'm always happy to chat. My Twitter handle is posted there. You can always find me on Twitter at LadyElite if you have any questions. I'm always happy to help. Going back to my day job, This.Dot, I love it. It's really cool. We get to work on some like really amazing projects, Twilio, Google, Roblox, Wikimedia, T-Mobile, Microsoft, et cetera, et cetera. There's just like so many fun things we get to do. And we're hiring. So if you love Angular, we are looking for so many Angular developers. I swear, like people saying, I mean, God, if you're an Angular developer, there is a job for you out there. So we're actually fully remote, 100% worldwide. Email me, come hang out. I love talking to new developers as well. So even if you just want to drop me a note and be like, hi, I might be looking in a few months, like poking my head up, like, you know, happy to chat. So again, let's go back to this question of how can I contribute to open source? We're going to talk a little bit about, you know, first off, my journey, talk about the why, like why do you want to contribute to open source, then learn how, and then also just some do's and don'ts. So let's go ahead and start off with my journey. How did I do this? How did I, you know, join open source? Well, I really enjoyed going to a JavaScript bootcamp a few years ago, meeting the JavaScript community. I started getting involved. As you know, I'm on the ArcGIS core team, right? At GDE and Microsoft MVP. And like, how did I actually do this? Well, I found Twitter and started talking to people. So find us all on Twitter. We're all on Twitter today. And I found out who was talking about Angular because I was really passionate about it, who was speaking at Angular conferences, what conferences were happening, and just like got to know the community generally. Then I started to share and educate. I started sharing my experience and helping, you know, educate people through their journey and sharing my journey. And, you know, this helped the community know that I was interested in relevant topics and I was able to give back in my own way, again, even as a beginner. And, you know, I was able to provide value to the Angular community. I also met maintainers. So meeting people so they know who you are and get to know you is really important. I got to meet tons of open source maintainers and develop amazing relationships online, at meetups, at conferences. Like if you're just nice and friendly and helpful, the rest will come, right? You just have to, I mean, you also have to find a community that you like. Thankfully, the Angular community is just amazing. So the last thing I did was actually contributing, right? So I always knew I wanted to give more back to the community. And I was always looking out on, hey, where can I help? You know, where can I actually be useful or helpful? And I was already really great friends with the ArcGIS core team. And, you know, I saw where they were needing help. They were struggling with keeping up with the documentation. And so I was like, okay, well, I mean, this is easy for me. I can like wrangle people and start a community team and we can take on this project. So I gathered a docs team together and we jump started on the docs. And shortly after I started spending a lot of time on this, they were like, okay, you should be part of the ArcGIS core team. So that was cool. If you start contributing, definitely don't expect to just like automatically become a part of a core team. That's really not the point, right? Like the point is to be helpful and contribute. And you know, if you feel like, you know, being a part of a core team is a reward, sometimes it's not, it's a curse because like, oh my gosh, you have like a lot of people needing your help now, then, you know, like maybe that'll happen at some point in time. Now that I've shown you the path and hopefully like provided you all with some tips that you could potentially do to be successful, let's talk about, you know, your why and how for contributing to open source. So the first question you probably want to ask yourself when you say, hey, I want to do this is why are you wanting to do this? Is it functional? Is it aspirational? Both paths are super awesome, but like, let's just go ahead and define functional and aspirational really quickly. So when we talk about like functional, for example, right? There's a ton of people who use a particular framework. So if you're a part of this meetup, you're probably using Angular or RxJS at work, right? And as you're working on those projects, you maybe need something to work that's not working, right? If you want to fix something in open source and make it work, I would consider this functional. Like that's why you're joining, right? And of course, open source is a really great way to build a career, get new jobs, increase your knowledge. So if you're doing it for, to build a career, then I would call that aspirational. And again, both paths are totally awesome, but the how you approach these is a little bit different. So let's go ahead and explore the functional first. This is the I need to fix something that's not working for me. So your life is going to be 10 times easier and you're going to get 10 times the result, or maybe it'll go from 0 to 100 because you might get 0 result if people don't know you. But you will get so much more results if you're actually already a contributor to the community or, a contributor to the repo that you're looking to fix for your work, right? So if you can, the first step is always to try to give and contribute before you have to actually ask for something, right? The second thing is, ask for feedback, submit an issue first. If you really want something to change for a reason, whether that's like big functionality or a small change, ask for feedback first. So submit an issue, find a maintainer somewhere on Twitter. GitHub is really noisy, so you probably want to find it somewhere else. Maintainers are also super busy. So, if they already know you and they already know you do good work, right? They're going to probably pay attention and be like, okay, this person's legit. I can spend some time with them versus I don't know who this person is. They submitted a PR. What am I doing? So submitting an issue again is really important because there's so much in open source that goes on behind closed doors. For example, you might really want a feature, right? But maybe the core team has already talked about it and decided against making this change. Or maybe what you want and this change you're trying to make is already being worked on privately. Or maybe it's already planned, right? So you don't want to waste your time if it's not going to be merged, right? There's just a lot under the surface that you may not be aware of. The third thing is build relationships. So again, maintainers are super busy. So Twitter, email are great ways to try to get a response, probably Twitter more so than email. GitHub notifications and issues, again, are just super noisy. If you send somebody a nice personal message and you're nice, you're usually more likely to get an answer. But definitely don't be impatient or feel like you're entitled to a response because you can email somebody 10 times and they might not respond to you. And it's not because they don't like you. So don't get mad about it. Maybe it's just going to their spam folder. Maybe they don't even respond to emails. Maybe they don't check that inbox, right? You just don't know what's going on. Maybe they're busy. Maybe you just don't know what's going on in people's lives. So again, that's why it's really important, to become part of a community before you ask for something. The last tip I would say on how to approach something if you're, wanting to contribute is make sure to build genuine relationships, right? So nobody likes to be used. If I go to Mark and I'm like, oh, Mark, you're so nice, blah, blah, blah. And then I ask him for something and then I disappear off the face of the earth. Mark's going to be like, was she just using me for something, right? Nobody likes to feel that way. And nobody likes to feel like you're just self-serving yourself. So remember to be genuine and remember that open source is a lot of just doing good for the community and not to serve the selfish needs of others, right? So aspirational. So I love this because when you're aspirational in open source, you can be so much more flexible, right? It's not oh, I'm doing Angular, so I have to, like the Angular community or whatever. You can do whatever the heck you want, right? So I would say, the first thing to remember is the reason why people are in open source is because they're trying to make a community better, right? So again, this whole idea of oh, I want a job, I'm going to do open source. It's very transparent to people and people don't really respond well to that. So, again, another reason why I really like being aspirational in open source is you get to choose which projects you contribute to. So when you look at a project and you're evaluating it for contribution, you should look at the issues and ask yourself, can I be a successful contributor in this? Are there issues I can tackle? Have I already used the library and realized that I could help in some way with documentation or something else, right? I would say also ask yourself, do I like this team? Look at the requests for comments, the PRs, the responses and the issues. Do I like them? Can I see myself working with them? If it's a no, then go find something else. No big deal, right? There's tons of teams and tons of different cultures out there, and you will absolutely find your fit, hopefully. The next thing you want to do, right, is solve problems that maintainers want. So, like, we all have ideas about what problems we think should be solved within a project, but you want to make sure that when you're actually wanting to contribute, like, these are actually problems the core team agrees need to be solved. Work on those first. There should be tons of issues marked as good first issue or looking for help within a repo. And, you know, also before you start working on an issue, it's really good to double check by commenting and asking if anybody's actually working on it. And then once you hear back, you know, it's a great way to start contributing. Third thing is just help with the docs. It's an easy way. I swear, if you talk to, you know, we all look up to tons of, you know, open source maintainers within this world. And they will all say, I started with the docs. Like literally 90% of them will say that. Also, if you ask any maintainers, 90% of them, maybe 100% of them, probably 100% actually, will say, we could use help with the docs. So do not discount that everybody needs help with docs, and they will greatly appreciate you because they need help with the docs. So if you're using documentation actively, right, you're probably going to find holes in the documentation. Maybe there's no live examples. Maybe the wording is wrong. Maybe there's better explanations that could be provided. Like, fill in the holes, be helpful there, and people will appreciate you so much, I promise. The last thing you want to do is educate and share. So make sure you're sharing your experience. If you're really passionate about something or a technology or a library, write blog posts about your experience. What do you love? How do you use certain features? What are upcoming features? You know, maybe you read like a feature release and something's coming up. Write about that. What challenges did you run into? Share them. You know, share your challenges. How did you solve them? And then just share with the community, right? Like, to contribute to open source, you don't actually have to directly contribute to a project repo with code to be useful and relevant within the community. Deborah has, but also, you know, one reason why we love Deborah so much is because she does all this educational content for us, right? She's not contributing to the Angular repo, even though she has before. That's not why she's like so ridiculously valuable within our community. So any and all education is always helpful and always wanted. So we talked about a few things today. Again, this is a quick start guide, so it's quick. But I also want to talk about the do's and the don'ts, right? So let's start with the do. Like, number one is have compassion, okay? Remember, maintainers are usually working for free on nights and weekends, or Mark gets paid for his job, but then he spends like his entire rest of his life helping build the community, which again is not, I mean, it's part of his job, but it's not part of his job. Like, he's not required to be on Twitter 24/7 and like be amazing and helpful to people, right? So most maintainers are usually working for free on nights and weekends. Treat maintainers like people. Remember that like they are just as human as you are, and they can only handle so many things at one time, right? So if you treat them like crap, they're not going to help you. Be professional. So open source projects, you know, this is like the wild, wild west, right? And, you know, they're not your job. Like, if you're a dick at your job, you might get fired or disciplined or whatever, right? And so just remember, though, like, when you're in open source, people are, you know, expecting you to be professional, have professional etiquette. You should absolutely treat those relationships with professionalism, like, you know, don't hit on people, et cetera, et cetera. Nobody likes to deal with people that don't respect each other, and, you know, kind of treat it like a workplace in a sense. That's why there's so many great code of conducts out there. Assume the best of intentions. Again, like, if you go into a project and you're like, this code is wrong, this is so messy, like, why is this happening? Or like, why are you ignoring me? You're such a dick, or, you know, whatever it is, or you're insulting the code. Like, nobody's going to give you the time of day. Nobody cares. Always assume the best of intentions when you approach open source maintainers, right? It's a tireless and often thankless job to keep everyone happy. And again, you might not be as close to those decisions that were made as, you know, the people that were making the decisions, and not understand why. I talked about code of conduct, but treat people as you would like to be treated. Always make sure you're abiding by a code of conduct that the project has. And if a project doesn't have a good code of conduct, then just generally be nice, right? And now for the don'ts. Okay, don't act or be entitled, right? Like this comes with the idea of being nice and patient. Don't assume you're the biggest priority for a maintainer, right? I mean, Ben, who wrote ArcsJS, he has a full-time job and then a full-time job in open source. Like that's hard, and 3 kids. So what do you do? Don't be annoying. Like just don't. Like don't email about an issue 10 times a day. Follow up. Like sometimes people just missed your email. It's fine, but like don't like be overly crazy about it. Also, don't complain. Everyone is trying their best. And sometimes, again, you just don't understand why a decision is being made because you're not as close to it as other people. So a lot of people will say, like, if you're going to complain about something you're getting for free, go use a different library, right? Which, is kind of true, right? But like you just generally, we want everybody to be nice here in the community. So I hope this talk was useful for you all. If you have any questions about my journey, I'm always happy to chat. And I hope this kind of gave you a picture of, again, how easy it is to get into open source, contribute, understanding some of the nuances of how people interact with each other, right? And I really hope to see all of you out there, like making more contributions to the community, writing more blog posts, even as beginners. I mean, most of my blogs were when I was a beginner and I just had to brain dump myself into a blog. And if you have time, please help with the docs as well. Wanted to shout out again to my amazing team. We do so, like Mark said, like we host so many events, State of Angular, Angular Contributor Days, love Angular World Tour, really excited that we're doing this. But we have a team of about 50 developers, 100% remote and worldwide. So you can always email me to hang out because we're hiring. So that's my email address. And, love to chat with all of you. So thanks for letting me share.
Thank you, Tracy. That was really great information. I liked how you broke down that functional versus aspirational way to think about contributing. I hadn't thought about it like that. So that was really, really good.
Thanks.
Yeah, let's see if there's any questions.
Ihor says, is this a Vue.js meetup? I mean, it could be.
Yes, welcome.
We can be anything you want.
Yeah, I think that contributing to open source sounds so intimidating, right? Like just, especially if it's a really large, well-used framework, even more so, like the pressure is so high. So I do like that Angular team I know in particular does this. I think many of the framework teams within the Angular community is so good and receptive about the first time, like beginner topics, first time issues, helping with docs. I think those are all really great. Great ways to contribute. And I really liked mentioning the adding educational content, like seeing how other people use the frameworks outside of just the documentation is so helpful. So.
And like, I mean, for all developers, I feel like, okay, you want to learn how to do something and you've read 10 blog posts and one of them will appeal to you or none of them will appeal to you. Because you just can't understand what the person is saying, right? Because everybody has different learning styles. So I highly encourage everybody to just like write everything down and post it because it's so useful, right?
Yeah, yep, for sure. All right, well, I think that is probably, probably it. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for allowing us to be part of the World Tour, Tracy and the Stott. This was wonderful. And thank you so much to our speakers. We had so much fun tonight and such amazing speakers. This is Yeah, Mark in the house and Deborah in the house and with Tracy in the house. Yeah, it was such a great time. So thank you.
Awesome.
It's great
See you
to be
next
here.
time,
Thanks for having
everyone.
me.
Yeah.